who will testify to this repressive Russian agenda in Georgia, a playbook that some also call hybrid warfare. We will hear from Baia Pataraia. She is director of Union Sapari and leading Georgian human rights and feminist activist. Levan Natroshvili, director of the International Society to Fair Elections and Democracy, Georgian Stop Election Monitoring and Democracy Promotion Organization, and Mamuka Andguladze, Chairperson of the Media Advocacy Coalition, a Georgian NGO supporting journalists and media organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, you are welcome. And first, I give the floor to Baia Pataraia.
I'm now talking about the situation in Georgia, which is very severe. We have very serious problem with democracy, and actually Georgia is becoming more and more autocratic country. Unfortunately, elections were reached in 2024-26 October elections, and since then the situation is deteriorating and gross human rights violations are taking place. After the elections in November and December, there were very brutal disruption of protests, where up to 300 people have been beaten and tortured. Since then, the demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations continue, and the demonstration is like non-stop. It is happening every day on in Tbilisi major avenue, Rustaveli Avenue, but also in big cities like Zugdidi and Batumi. And the government, the regime, as we call them, they announced that they want to disrupt these demonstrations by all means. What we have now is that more than 110 political prisoners of conscience that we have, and per capita it is even more than it is in Russia. And more than 1,000 people have been arrested administratively during this 1 year. So freedom of assembly is almost impossible in Georgia. People are also fined with huge fines. Up to $1 million fines are carried by individuals just because they are protesting in the streets. And very problematic legislation has been adopting during this 1 year. For instance, if you violate the rules, so-called rules of freedom of assembly, twice, you can get imprisoned criminally for up to 1 year. This is how difficult it is to protest, and we see this as a Russian playbook. We have seen this in Russia, how it was happening in Russia, how it was happening in Belarus, and it is pretty much copy-pasted from there. In addition, what we see, which is similar to what was happening in Russia, is freedom of association and fight against independent non-governmental organization. We have adopted the first so-called Russian law, as we called it, and then they adopted so-called FARA, Foreign Agent Registration Act, and also they adopted loan grants, which means that no non-governmental organization is able to receive any foreign fund or donation without permission of the government, and the permissions are not issued. And everyone who receives any kind of foreign aid from abroad is believed to be a foreign agent. And actually all the independent organizations now are called foreign agents, and there are a lot of proceedings going on against non-governmental organizations. In addition, there is a so-called sabotage case. Under this case, 5 funds and 7 biggest non-governmental organizations, including my own organization, is under the investigation of sabotage, and all our assets have been frozen, and this is also very similar to what was happening in Russia. And I cannot say that we have shrinking of civil space. I would say that we have complete crackdown of civil society in Georgia, and all of this is done on purpose. Also, I would like to say that the relations of Georgian government with Russia is really untransparent, and all the meetings which is happening between them is held in secrecy. No one attends. They don't feel accountable, and they don't report back to Georgian people to what they are negotiating with. They have very frequent meetings with Belarus as well on high level. And we see that all the methods that current ruling party Georgian Dream is using is very similar to Russian and Belarus type of autocratic governance and regime. But I want to assure you that the resistance is alive, it's very strong. Georgian people do not remember being under dictatorship since collapse of Soviet Union, and it's not easy to make Georgia a full-fledged dictatorship. People are resisting despite all of these brutal repressions that we face, financial, physical, arrests, everything that we face. Despite of it, every day there is a protest going on, and on a daily basis people are being detained, 7 people, 10 people, like on everyday basis, for having marches, for just gathering on Rustaveli Avenue. Even without blocking the streets, people are still getting arrested on a daily basis. But the resistance continues because we cannot give up on democracy. We cannot give up on our aspiration, our EU aspiration. We believe to be a democracy. We want to remain as a democracy, and we want to continue our Euro integration and our path towards Europe. Thank you.
Should I push anything here?
No?
Okay. Hello again. Thanks for coming. I'll continue the line my colleague presented here. So unfortunately, the situation in Georgia is quite complicated, I would say, and I will speak more on the political landscape, which is relevant for Georgia at this point. As my colleague mentioned, so we have very clear signs of democratic backsliding and the consolidation of authoritarian regime, I would say. It has started, I guess, especially after 2022, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the last phase of these repressions and the steps against democracy basically started after 2024 October parliamentary elections. The results of these elections were very controversial and not recognized by major stakeholders in the country and outside the country. There were very critical assessments of these elections and the manipulations used during the parliamentary elections. And after that, in November last year, the Prime Minister Kobakhidze announced that Georgia stopped the process of accession talks with the European Union, and it actually caused a lot of protests in Georgia, which is ongoing, as my colleague mentioned here. It also significantly affected political life in Georgia. The opposition political parties boycotted the work of the parliament because of these manipulated results, and none of them, except one political party, are in the parliament right now. After that, the Georgian Dream government and the parliament started to implement various types of repressions, starting from legislative amendments and restricting civil and political liberties, harshly criticized by the OSCE and the Venice Commission, ending with the practical repressions, imprisoning people, including the leaders of political parties. At this moment, almost all leaders of major opposition political parties are in jail with various charges, and of course it created very unhealthy political environment. We also had the municipal elections in October this year, and because of these repressions, because of unhealthy political environment, major opposition parties decided to boycott the municipal elections, and it was absolutely non-competitive. Also, there were not any trustful, I would say, election observer organizations for municipal elections, which ultimately resulted in the lack of legitimacy of the results and the lack of legitimacy of the governments, unfortunately, amongst the major groups in the society. So it creates, of course, a very critical moment, I guess, for Georgia, because in addition to this kind of consolidation of power at each and every level and the state capture, I would say, of all political and non-political institutions by one party, of course, there's no room for any kind of discussion left, political discussions especially. In addition to that, after the municipal elections, the ruling party decided to appeal to the Constitutional Court and requested to ban 3 major opposition political parties. Of course, it further increases the political temperature and creates very unhealthy environment. We need some kind of ways out, I guess, of this political crisis, and of course, we think that the first step should be taken by the Georgian Dream is to stop these kinds of political repressions against the protesters, against the political leaders, against the civil society and media representatives. And after that, we think that it's needed to hold new parliamentary elections, snap parliamentary elections, which will be, preceded by the electoral reform, inclusive electoral reform, addressing the main kind of major problems in electoral legislation and practice. We have many opinions released by the OSCE, Venice commissions in different years, and of course these recommendations should be taken into consideration, and that might somehow decrease the political temperature. At this point, we don't see, of course, this political will of the Georgian Dream that they are going to do that, but unfortunately, there is no other way, to somehow, let's say, return to the normal kind of mode, because at this point, the polarization is very, very high. So on the one hand, we have pro-government kind of groups in the society. There are propaganda, very strong propaganda, disinformation campaigns against opposition, against those electorate who are not supporting the ruling party. They are using all kinds of Russian-style disinformation campaigns, and the propaganda machine is very, very strong. And on the other hand, we have a major part of society, I guess, which is kind of against the ruling party, the Georgian Dream, but unfortunately these groups are fragmented. And it is much easier for the Georgian Dream, to defeat these groups as a whole. And I think the steps towards some kind of, decrease in terms of political polarization is very important right now. And we request from our colleagues in partner countries that these requests are presented to the Georgian Dream at various levels, at the level of UN, at the level of Council of Europe, at the level of European Union. So at each and every level, it's very important to raise these questions. And we'll see. So it's an ongoing process. Unfortunately, it's very hard to say what will happen in the future, but we'll try our best, of course. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you very much for coming, attending this meeting. I will focus mostly on the challenges the Georgian independent media outlets are facing these days. The situation with media has never been very ideal since our independence. However, the threats independent media outlets facing these days are existential threats. Besides the local independent media outlets, also international journalists also face serious challenges since the Georgian Dream has accelerated its attack against civil society, Georgian people and media outlets. Georgian Dream government pursues a clear goal when it has attacks against media, because it has negative and positive campaign. It's a style of the campaign which has rewritten from the taken from the Russian style, because first of all it's shifting Georgia's orientation from the Europe integration towards authoritarianism, and the propaganda and media outlets, including public service broadcaster, which is under the control of the Georgian Dream, echoes the statements, justifies violence, and etc. The purpose of the Georgian Dream's media policy is to maintain political control, suppressing dissent, suppressing protest, at the same time also legitimizing the protest. So adopting the laws which then in the next day after adoption says, like, now you're violating the law, but for the last 30 years it was quite normal to conduct the professional activity. And of course preventing international pressure, and that's the reasons why they're creating the challenges for international media. They have adopted since last year around 20 laws or changed into the law, existing laws. The key goal of all changes are to suppress critical expression. And if you look how the dynamic in Russia, how these laws and where they have been adopted, in a speed way the Georgian Dream is adopting these laws especially since 2024. We have identified more than 600 incidents involving attacks, intimidation, harassment, temporary detention against independent media outlets. All of these cases are identified by various sources, but the shadow number is even higher because in some cases journalists are not reporting about ordinary harassment or intimidation. We are having first female political prisoner, Zia Marloveli. More than 300 days she is in prison. Her political prison status has been recognized by literally almost all international organizations, and just recently she got the Sakharov Prize. Journalists are detaining heavily fined, like civil society activists or just ordinary people. But in case of journalists, while covering the protest, while performing the duties, some of them have been detained for several days under administration law. The court trials are closed for media because the media, since all this turmoil had began revealing the false testimonies given by the police officers or the falsified evidences and etc. And that's why they have shut down media coverage of the court trials. Propaganda is working literally around the clock without any holidays or exceptional days. They're targeting domestic stakeholders and targeting international stakeholders. And at the beginning I mentioned what kind of purposes their propaganda follows. It's both negative and positive, representing Georgian Dream as a successful, very powerful power which runs a country, protects, like in case of Russia, national sovereignty, and at the same time attacking the stakeholders which are defending Georgian democracy, Georgian sovereignty, and our international partners. State-captured institutions, it has reached the unprecedented level in our history since our independence. Literally, there is no independent institutions left in country. All of them are under government control, including media-related constitutional bodies like Public Service Broadcaster and the Georgian Communications Commission. Access to information is severely limited, irrespective to which body are you applying or requesting the freedom of information. It's like central body or local authorities. In most cases, they're either ignoring you or not providing any information. International journalists, including Swiss journalists, are denied to enter the country without any reasonable explanation. But in most cases, international journalists are related to the cases when they were covering the protest or they writing some objective articles which is critical given the situation, what's happening in the country. Regional media is almost disappearing because these repressive laws struck very hard, first of all, regional media outlets, but of course leading or like mainstream media outlets used to be quite more or less like powerful in the few years. Now they are also under huge attack. And the founder and leader of Georgian Dream, as the RSF report called him, the Georgian oligarch who runs the country, he has been listed as one of the predators of press freedom by RSF. Despite all the challenges, I would like to say that like civil society organizations, activists, and ordinary citizens who express critical opinion towards ongoing situation, Georgian media outlets are, of course, continuing the work. It is hard. We are facing the reality. But at the same time, since there is no other way, it's about future of the country, it's our personal future and democratization. We are continue our work. This is just briefly about the situation with regard to the media, the challenges, and in case of your questions with regard to media and others, we'll be more than happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much for this presentation and point of the situation in Georgia for the civil society, organization, media. First, I can start with a question, and after I give the floor to the people who are here and online too. Salome Zurabishvili is not with us. She had unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but she explained in an interview in the newspaper in France that this crackdown in Georgia is like a weakening power, the sign of a weakening power. Do you agree with that? These words of President Salome Zurabishvili?
Actually, well, Georgian Dream right now is taking very serious steps. It's very aggressive and it's very fast. Whatever is happening, like in Russia, they took like 10 years to really crack down civil society organization. In Georgia, it is happening only for like several months, and the tempo is really different, and it leaves a feeling that they're in a rush. As they have a feeling that they don't have enough time to spend on authoritarianism. And why this is so? First of all, we don't have self-sufficient economy. We're not Russia. We're not even Belarus or Azerbaijan. We don't have oil or any other resources. We are very much dependent on others, on Europe and on the rest of the world. And also, having authoritarianism needs a lot of human resources. That population should be like in line with your ideology, and they should be helping you out in order to have a real authoritarianism. We don't have real authoritarianism in Georgia, and they're trying to look like dictatorship, but they're not, because people is not with them. The people are not helping them out, and the economy is not helping them out, and that's why they're speeding up so fast, because they have a feeling that they do not have enough resources and they do not have enough time, and that's why I think that it mostly actually looks like they're not self-confident, and that's why it looks like it's tells about their weakness, because they're not sure that whatever they are doing, they have support and enough power within the country.
Okay, I give the floor to the people who are here or online. Ms. Tobias, questions? Serge Michel from ID News.
Hello. We are not very surprised by the playbook of the regime, as you said, because we know the methods in Russia, Belarus. But what is the playbook of the opposition? I mean, there was an idea that somehow the demonstration could be a Maidan, a Georgian Maidan, like in Ukraine in 2014. But it's not the case. I mean, every night the people evacuate the streets, and there is nobody left after midnight or 1 a.m., something like this. So there is no Maidan in Georgia. So what is the playbook, and do you think this presence in the street is like a failure and will not lead anywhere, or do you think people have still to go there and be arrested sometimes or harassed? What are the other options that opposition has to resist?
Well, opposition is weak, and this is a scenario in every authoritarian country. If you have authoritarian country, you don't have strong opposition because they do not let them, and major oppositional leaders are in prison, and of course they cannot govern or rule from prison, and that's why they are left like leaderless parties right now because of that, and it's done on purpose, so it's not a big surprise. But I would say that the resistance, what is happening in the streets of Georgia, is more civil resistance. Of course, oppositional parties are there present as well, but mostly it is led by civil groups, self-organized groups. I wouldn't say that it is led by non-governmental organizations as well. No, it's completely civil. And I wouldn't compare it to Maidan. Maidan lasted only for like several months, and whatever is happening in Georgia, it is happening for 1 year already. And we have our own vision how we are doing it. It's not 24/7, but it's permanent. It's like every day. I think that the resistance is successful. First of all, the government's Georgian Dream does not have legitimacy, neither in the country nor outside the country. And all of this is happening because the resistance is permanent in Georgia. I think that we're doing our resistance on our own, in a Georgian way, in a Georgian style. And I think that for us it's very important that resistance does not stop. We shouldn't make the same mistakes what Belarusians did, and it should be a lesson for us what to avoid and how to avoid. And we are trying actually to look to other resistance as well and to study as many lessons as possible. For us, it's very important that the structure of civil society in a big sense is maintained, it remains, and it is alive. Of course, we don't want more political prisoners and prisoners of conscience in the prisons, but we want the resistance to stay there strong, because Georgia is a smaller country with a vulnerable economy, and we're very much also dependent what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in the world, but we make sure that we're ready when the momentum is there.
If I may add a couple of comments here. For sure, this protest is civil protest, and it's not aligned with any political party. As it was from the very beginning, actually, the protest was not organized by one center, by one group. So it was very diverse, and the various groups basically were active in there. I would say that even political parties were the less active groups, I guess, in this protest. On the one hand, it was a strength, I guess, of this protest because it was a widespread, countrywide protest. But on the other hand, of course, it has had and has disadvantages as well, because lack of coordination, lack of organization, of course, and the fragmentation and the lack of cooperation in certain kinds of activities and actions. Of course, it has its own kind of disadvantages and weaknesses. And I think that at this point, so the question was how it can be transformed, I guess, in other form or whatever. So I think there is a need for some kind of rethinking the protests and resistance and inventing and more creative ways how to protest and also continue the resistance as such. And I think here the role of opposition parties are very important now, because political elections are in general one of the strongest kind of actions in any kind of change, and unfortunately lack of opposition political parties and their role in this process is a very, very significant weakness right now. We don't see at this point any ground that the opposition will be united. For instance, at least they will try to unite their efforts because it is very fragmented right now. They blame each other, accuse each other, so there is no healthy relations between opposition political parties. And as Baia mentioned, of course, the imprisonment of political leaders also has affected this lack of cooperation pretty much significantly. And unfortunately, at this point, there is no kind of clear way out of this kind of fragmentation, but for sure it is needed. Because we're talking about the regime and the ruling party, which is very strong. All kinds of resources are in the hand of the ruling party, all kinds of financial, administrative, human resources, and without any kind of unification and coordination and cooperation among the protest society, I would say, including the political parties, it would be impossible, I guess, to defeat this kind of regimes, I would say.
Just briefly, I also would like to respond to a question. The civil movements and protests which are taking place or took place, they have also some similarities and differences, and it is not always like a copy-paste issues. However, in our case, which is quite distinguishable for others, it's like national resistance, because it is a protest is taking place not only in the capital but also in other cities. And the representatives of various groups gathered together without prior coordination, etc., because it's like a national protest movement. We're having, unfortunately, and as my colleague mentioned, hundreds of political prisoners. More people have been fined due to these repressive laws. But at the same time, you have quite new leaders, future leaders, who are in this process and emerging. It's not their own decision to be part of this, but they had no other choice, because people from various professions, quite successful, they came together to protest. And that's why we're protesting democratically. It's a little bit slow, but it's more sustainable. And there are different groups representing different professions, and they have already a vision what should be done now and next. It's a slow process, but what is quite important, we use all our constitutional rights to resist these repressive regimes, and the solidarity, which is unprecedented in our not only modern history, in our all history, around the countries gathered together expressing the solidarity towards individual prisoners or groups, etc. Of course, this gives us a hope that at the end, the protest will be successful, and that's the reasons why repressive regime like Georgian Dream, irrespective what kind of playbooks they have, the reasons why they're adopting new laws, new restrictions, because the people are not accepting this regime. Otherwise, last year they have already beaten hundreds of the people, but the people continue to protest, and that's the reason that majority of the Georgian are on the right side of history, with the exception of the Georgian Dream people.
Thank you for the answers. Yes, Mr.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Dave Elsrod. I'm with the Human Rights House Foundation. Maybe to the panelists first, thanks for being here this morning. I took note of the case that you've made about the crackdown taking place in Georgia with ban on foreign funding, on requiring you to register as foreign agents, use of sabotage laws to go after independent civil society. And at the same time, I hear the point that you make about, largely for economic reasons, that potentially international pressure can be valuable. And I wonder if you could speak maybe to how you would evaluate the international community's response to what has happened in Georgia over the last 12 months, and the extent to which you feel like the international community has leverage that it can use to try to push for reform. Thank you.
First of all, it's very important that both Georgian people and pro-democratic forces internationally stand on the same ground and have the same understanding that Georgian Dream, who rigged the elections, is a legitimate power. And it's very important that democratic countries remember it and act accordingly. Because Georgian people's aspiration is democracy and membership of European Union and remaining in the international order. Unfortunately, Georgian Dream is violating basic human rights. We have gross human rights violations, and they should be accountable for it. Whatever sanctions has been taken place, visa bans or different individual sanctions or collective sanctions, all of this is happening because what Georgian Dream does, and everybody also tells them what they should do in order to avoid this kind of sanctions. And this is also repealing all these very problematic draconic laws, releasing political prisoners, and having new free and fair elections in order to normalize the political landscape and situation in Georgia. And I think that it is a very correct accent, and this should continue. And I think that actually these kind of efforts do really work. First of all, I will remind you that everyone who has been sanctioned by different countries now, except for one, do not hold any positions. So even Georgian Dream is getting rid of the sanctioned people themselves. So it really works. And also, Georgian people really feel support from international organizations when they see the adequate steps. And it really empowers the will and the resistance of the people. So, and I just want to thank you, UN agencies, and we are here in Geneva. We will be participating in UPR very soon. But I want to highlight that, my organization, Sapari, has ensured interim measures from UN Children's Rights Committee and from CEDAW, Women's Rights Committee. And it was a very good safeguard and guarantees for the organization. And I would say that UN was the only body so far who adequately responded to this critical situation in Georgia. And I think that it's very important that all these international bodies or governments correctly assess and take bold steps to defend democracy on spot.
Just briefly. All kind of these civil movement, democratic movements set some kind of practices and lessons learned, democratic countries should also learn the lessons, and authoritarians should definitely learn the lessons from any of this kind of movement. I just want to refer to one of the reports of Freedom House, which I fully agree with the statement stated that for democracies, for the established democracies, as a matter of own survival, should not only strengthen and support internal democracy, but also externally, because it's like globalization and practices of authoritarian practices are not stopping at the border. It's sharing. They're sharing the bad guys, they're sharing the practices. And of course, it's like not only domestically should increase democracy, but externally, because otherwise this authoritarian wave can reach your country as well. And that's the reasons why this Georgian case, it's not only for us important, but also from regional perspective. And when we read, for example, international media, similar narratives, you are having some kind of errors. Are you reading about the Georgian propaganda narratives or international ones? So that's why we have to express our solidarity. And once again, thank you very much to international community and to the international journalists who are still coming to Georgia to cover. But since we are in a free fall, because the people are resisting, if people stop resisting, there will be no media coming, and because you accepted this reality. That's why it's hard to compete with other big events, what's happening, and it's not a race. And plus, domestically, within established democracies, there are also many challenges. But this is a way how the world now looks like, and for this reason, adequate reaction from the international community, democracy forces, it's all important, but do not understand us wrongly. We are not thankful for the already expressing solidarity, etc., but we are in free fall and we should adjust more quickly to the current reality.
Another question, I have maybe a question more. The world is changing. In Caucasus too, for example, there's Russia is losing influence in other countries, like Armenia, for example. And why in Georgia it's not the same situation? Because of the Black Sea? Because why?
First of all, Russia is very much interested to maintain power, especially in post-Soviet countries and around its neighboring countries. And it never gives up easily. I think that Armenians are acting very smart right now, and they are using all their opportunity to break through this vicious circle of Russia's influence. Unfortunately, I mean, Georgians are fighting Russia for like 200 years, and sometimes we're more successful, sometimes we're less successful. Right now, I think that they're winning because they have pro-Russian government, and they actually, we have full state capture. We don't have any independent institutions left in the country, and all of it is governed by Russian oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili, who has very strong ties with Russia. And this is how actually Russia is taking over the Georgia, using this pro-Russian government and this Russian oligarch. And of course, this is temporary. If we look at it historically, this fight for independence, including independence from Russia, will continue in Georgia. And we are actually performing our duty and task as the citizens of Georgia who defend their own country from a historic enemy.
If I may add a couple of points here. Yeah, that's a good question, actually. Everybody asks that question, actually. Whoever we meet, so they ask this question. Why did they do that? And what was the main reason for that? And yeah, it's very hard to answer that question. We don't have definite answer. But for me, so it's clear that Bidzina Ivanishvili, who is a former ruler of Georgia right now, and has been an informal ruler for decade now. So he bets apparently on Russia in the conflict with Ukraine. So that's one of the main reasons I would say that he thinks that Russia will win in this war, and that's why it is very important to support Ukraine as well. So it's not a war only between Russia and Ukraine. It is very important process and war for Europe and for Georgia as well. So that's why I guess the future of Georgia is intertwined with the future of Ukraine, future of Moldova as well. And if Ukraine succeeds in this war, Georgia will also succeed. So that's why it's very important to understand the context in the region. In addition to that, of course, we can say that right now the Georgian Dream basically transformed into a force, political force, which wants to keep power as long as possible. And of course, they see that democratic reforms and democratic steps cannot ensure their eternal power, I guess, and that's why choosing the kind of more guaranteed way to become more authoritarian and, you know, to repress the opposition and repress the competitors, it's a better way, and it's a good practice, I guess, in our neighborhood, how you can, you know, prolong your stay in power. And these two factors, I guess, the bet on Russia and the desire to keep power as long as possible, they basically coincided, and what we have right now in Georgia, that's a reason for that.
Serge Michel?
Yeah. You mentioned the name of the oligarch, Ivanishvili. I mean, we would expect somebody like him that has helped supported the repression, that has forged the elections and everything, to be under sanctions, but from the West. But it's all the opposite. I mean, he won a case here in Switzerland because his money was like robbed by somebody in the Credit Suisse, and he will be compensated apparently. So it's the opposite of sanctions. Do you know if there is any process to request sanctions against him, and what is his own personal situation regarding his money and fortune, which is supporting the regime?
First of all, Bidzina Ivanishvili considers himself to be sanctioned, and of course he's right. He is already actually being under sanction because he cannot use his money, what he has abroad, and he faces a lot of challenging uses, and he's complaining about it all the time, like all the time. Every interview he gives, he only complains about his money, that he's not actually able to manage his own money that he has. Even in the cases when he wins the money to some banks or whatever he has, then he's not able to actually manage to get money or to somehow disperse this money. I think that some countries are like taking slow. They are still, like in US, we have this Megobari Act, which is under consideration still, and we know that some other countries are also working on it, and some of them need like legal acts in order to be able to take more steps for this sanctioning, and I think it's up to these countries, of course. But as I say, it's not a very easy process for them. But I would say that Ivanishvili moved lots of his property from US and from different countries via offshore zones, and they even amended legislation in Georgia, and he entered all his property without paying a penny of taxes in Georgia. So he was preparing for sanctions for sure, and he tried to safeguard his lots of assets because he is already having serious problems. Unfortunately, it shows also his intentions, that he wants to remain in Georgia as a king, as a dictator, and that's why he is trying so hard to safeguard the money which is left. And we know that he lost a lot of money during this process, and he is not holding like 7 billion anymore. He dropped out from different lists of these billionaires with this. So actually, whatever he is doing, it costs him a lot of money.
A clear question. A clear answer, excuse me. Other questions? Yes?
Thank you. You're painting a very bleak picture of the democratic situation in Georgia. And everyone's supporting this bleak situation, including oligarchs. Do you see a difference between people who financially support the party that has the power, Georgian Dream, and other oligarchs or philanthropists who support the opposition or NGOs, including from abroad, or have been doing so?
Unfortunately, so there are no other oligarchs, I guess, in Georgia who can support the opposition. If you look at the official kind of figures of donations, for instance, attracted by various opposition parties, so of course they struggle to get funding from private sources, from Georgian citizens and wealthy persons. And it's a result of these kinds of policies of the ruling party, of course. In certain cases, this is a self-censorship, and nobody wants to have problems with the Georgian Dream because of funding the opposition openly. That's one of the reasons. Maybe they are not kind of repressed, but they still, they don't want problems, right? So potential problems. And in addition to that, of course, there were some cases when a certain businessman faced some problems because of funding the opposition or civil groups or certain individuals. So that's why, unfortunately, in Georgia we don't have free environment, and you are not free to fund anyone you want in the country, because you take a huge risk to be repressed by the Georgian Dream. As for the donors of the Georgian Dream, of course, it's much easier. It is, on the one hand, it's a tit for tat, a kind of a bargain for kind of these businessmen who get some kind of tenders, public tenders and contracts and various kinds of properties from the state in exchange for donations and funding the ruling party. That's a kind of mutually beneficial kind of process. And on the other hand, of course, there are some cases that the businessmen are scared of not funding actually the Georgian Dream. So that's why, unfortunately, we don't have many wealthy Georgians across the world who can somehow compete with Ivanishvili. And as I said, all kinds of resources are right now in the hand of Georgian Dream, and it simplifies the life of Georgian Dream. And of course, the opposition parties and their actions and their fragmentation also played role, of course, in this process, because nobody wants to, help fragmented and weak opposition, right? Everybody wants to see the strong and potential in the opposition in order to support them. But at this point, we don't see this kind of possibilities in Georgia, and it's very hard to say how to change the situation.
Just briefly, when we stated about repressive laws, it targets civil society organization, it targets media outlets. In Georgia, the media advertising market was never sustainable for the existing media outlets. The good and unbiased, objective media outlets, especially online ones or investigative journalists, are mostly supported by donor community, because the state capture and other issues and the censorship. And through this legislation, for example, the broadcasters, including both radio televisions, are not allowed to receive any cent from abroad. And this FARA legislation, this Russian style law, so targeting both civil society and media outlets. So all these legislations have been adopted in order to severely restrict or fully abolish the operational capacities of organizations, and these days this is the situation. But when I mentioned a couple of minutes ago about the solidarity, it is literally unprecedented. Whoever has some kind of resources, an ordinary citizen, started at like €1 or like 100 euros. The people are helping each other. Of course, it's not sufficient always, but when you hear the stories like the activist has been illegally fined for 5,000 laris, and the people gathered together, and in 1 hour and less than an hour, 1,000 people help them. Of course, it is quite cheerful, but otherwise, this extra or domestic support at high level, of course, there is no such support, and the laws are forbidding to do this stuff as well.
Yes, okay. Thank you for the answer. And maybe last question. There's a lot of Russian people who are living now in Tbilisi because of the war in Ukraine, and it has influenced about the level of apartments, and every prices are higher and higher. Is it difficult to, for the civil society, Tbilisi and as a place in the country, to live with this situation? How is the link between these people and the civil society?
I wouldn't separate civil society from ordinary people in this situation. Actually, when the war started and we had this very big wave of Russian citizens coming to Georgia, the prices went like crazy high of renting apartment, or even like to the restaurants or whatever. It was like after COVID, and COVID also increased everything's price, and then this wave of immigration increased the prices. So now a lot of them left, actually, so the prices are going, at least for the rent, are going a little bit down. But it was very difficult, especially for students from regions, to get an apartment when they were coming for studies in Tbilisi. It was like a very big problem at some point. But I don't know, I mean, the inflation is very problematic in Georgia. The prices of food is rising, and like Georgian Dream all the time talks about like economic increase, but it's only Georgian Dream members who are getting richer, nobody else. And we have a very serious economic and social problem with like ordinary people, that the country is going on economic rise, but nobody feels it except for a handful of people who are all of them getting multimillionaires. Everyone is multimillionaire who is now in the parliament and in the government of Georgian Dream, and this is so obvious, and people are just getting poorer and poorer. So and that's why like 800, we're 2.7 million, right? 800,000 people are dependent on the aid from the government. And actually, when we talk about GD supporters, most of the time, these are people who are like dependent on the governmental aid of 100 euros per month in order not to starve and not to die from starvation. And this, having losing middle class and having this huge problem of poverty, actually helps Georgian Dream to have some kind of electoral control over the population. And this is a very serious challenge and problem that we have and that we face, this huge inequality of income, which is only accessible to someone who is related to Georgian Dream and for nobody else. We don't have a free business in Georgia. You can have a business and you can get rich only if you are in the elite of Georgian Dream. But if you're not, there is nothing for you. On the contrary, and if you're somehow related to protest, you're losing your own money. You're not getting any money at all. It's like forbidden by law now to receive any donation. Even individual donations is impossible for NGOs or medias to receive. And even political parties, like oppositional political parties seriously have a problem to pay a rent for the office. Nobody are receiving any salaries, and like we're like literally broke. The entire civil society right now, like media, non-governmental organization, oppositional parties, we are all broke. And what we're fighting now, we're fighting with our own very little resources and with just very big heart. So that's the reality.
Yes.
This is a fact. Unfortunately, this economic developments which Georgian Dream government is bolstering its own success. Just right now, the Georgian Dream's Prime Minister is giving annual address in the Parliament. By the way, online media outlets have been blatantly forbidden to enter the building and etc. This is now new standards for more than 1 year. And media is reporting that Georgian Dream's Prime Minister stated that our economic development, despite the success, is very low, and we are behind even the poorest EU country. I don't know what happened with him, but we all knew that because we live in the country. And from my as personal experience, around 10 years ago, I used to study and live in Zurich. And of course, I mean, Zurich is one of the most expensive cities in the whole world. But when I arrived here after several years, I had the feeling that, oh, the prices are somehow like Georgian Tbilisi prices are similar to the at least Geneva prices. So I'm not feeling very uncomfortable. So just like his own admission by Prime Minister, of course, this has all influence to control citizens during voting, etc.
Thank you very much for these answers, for this presentation, for the discussion with the public and with us. If there's no other questions or anything, I will really thank you and wish the best for the future, really. Thank you very much.